Muchas gracias. Estoy muy contento de estar con ustedes y compartir mi historia. Nosotros como diseñadores tenemos la oportunidad de expandir fronteras y mi oportunidad llegó en los años 90 y desde entonces he estado trabajando con grupos a nivel internacional en un lenguaje común. Por esa razón, mi presentación de hoy va a ser en inglés, pero mi compromiso con la comunidad es seguir compartiendo estas historias en español y en inglés, y esta presentación también va a ser la voy a compartir con ustedes en español después de la presentación de hoy. Okay, I'm going to start with a short story, and I'm pretty sure that this has never happened to any one of you, but a friend of mine in Europe, actually a Colombian designer, was looking for his next consulting engagement. And he went to an interview when he was contacted by the recruiter that they were looking for a UX researcher. When he went to the interview, the hiring manager told him, well, in reality, we're looking kind of for a UX designer. And then when he did the follow-up, what happened then was the fact that they actually hired a visual designer. And he asked them why. Well, we need somebody to concentrate on the visuals. The answer or the questions that he formulated to the hiring manager were like, visuals to whom? What is the value that the visual design is going to add to the product? What problem are you solving with the visuals? Obviously, to which the hiring manager didn't have an answer. But I'm pretty sure that that has never happened to any one of us here. The problem that we are facing right now, is that in our desire to differentiate from each other and differentiate our areas of expertise and specialization, we're coming with all these very different titles for what we do. They're rightfully describing the areas that we're concentrating on, but they're also confusing some of the people that we have to sell the value of our work and the value of what we deliver. So for today's presentation, please bear with me. I'm going to talk about we are all designers from a capital D perspective, the umbrella of what we do. Okay? Let's take a quick look at the world around us. So you may be familiar with John Maeda's Designing Tech report. And in his work here, he's basically highlighting the fact that the war for talent is very rapidly increasing all over the world. Companies like McKinsey, Accenture, Facebook, Google, they're basically buying design organizations, design consulting firms to get the talent that they're needing. That's the good news. Also, related to that, organizations that had reserved business and technology roles in their higher level of executive positions are now being recognized for designers. And last but not least, I think the fact that venture capitals are now creating funds that are either founded by designers or have a focus on design, inclusion, and diversity. When you look at what Gartner is doing right now in terms of the surveys that they are conducting with executives around the world, they're basically uncovering that a lot of organizations are tackling some kind of customer experience or design transformation program. And that the executives say that their brand and their product and their organization is going to compete primarily on that experience. However, when you look deeper, and in this case what Forrester is doing, all the executives say, yeah, user experience is really important, but what they're uncovering is that the trend of those efforts and those initiatives is only superficial. So what's going to happen is that they're going to hit a small peak in terms of, oh yeah, we're working on customer experience and transformation, but their quality of service and quality of experience is going to decline. I'm very happy to see a study from McKinsey, and Katia referred to this last night in her presentation, where they have done probably one of the largest and more detailed studies of publicly traded companies across different industries. And a couple of the highlights, the good and the bad news. The good news, we already knew this, and McKinsey has taken its time to determine these from their scientific and data analysis perspective. But design generates higher revenues and higher shareholder value. The problem and the difference between the top quartile companies in this study and the rest is that there's a lot of opportunity for us as designers. Companies don't talk to their customers when they are doing the product development process, and also they don't know how to measure the impact of design and the design teams in their organizations. So there's a big opportunity for us. I'm going to cover today from a very broad perspective, regardless of where you are in your design journey, whether you're a team of one in a small organization or a team of one in a large organization, whether you are individual contributor in a team, or you are building, growing, or expanding a design group, I'm going to share some stories that will hopefully you can take away things that are applicable to you. This work that I have been doing over the last couple of years wouldn't be possible if other design leaders wouldn't share their stories. In this group of highlights, I have talked to actually 3 designers from Latin America, 3 from Europe, and a couple from the US. So I'm going to break my talk into 3 areas. Let's start with the first one. And it's about building design influence. And some of the other speakers have talked about this fact, but if you do not develop strong partnerships, you cannot do this in terms of design leadership or design capability alone. Actually, John Maeda, in the October update of the Design in Tech report, highlights the fact that developing partnerships is becoming one of the strongest and most valuable leadership skills for designers. Because without those partnerships, we cannot make or achieve the work that we're planning to tackle. The other thing that it is very critical, and I'm glad to see so much diversity in terms of the different levels of experience of people attending this event, but it is about design leaders needing to develop the community of support within their organization and also the community of support outside of the organization. And what I have seen when I talked to Larissa Acevedo, who's a Brazilian designer working in Australia, she was sharing with me the fact that her executive director, basically the C-level executive of her division, would bring the 5 design executives under her area of responsibility into the C-level leadership meetings. That kind of development at the top level is super critical, but it's also critical at the base level. I have actually a designer that was working for me, and she was very interested in management. So we didn't have an opportunity in our organization, but we worked together for her to be prepared when that opportunity arose. About a year later, she went on to lead the design team in one of the top retailers in the US market. So even if you don't have that opportunity, you have to create and facilitate and work with the people in your team to develop. And if you're an individual contributor and you want to be promoted or want to grow in your career, you have to ask, you have to actually look at your managers and your leaders in your organization to find what those opportunities are going to be looking for for you. Another critical aspect, and as I mentioned, John Maeda in the Design in Tech report highlights this very strongly in his arguments, and his work over the last year has concentrated very heavily on diversity and inclusion. If we hire people that look like us, that have studied the same thing that we have, we are basically curtailing our efforts in our organizations. So not only gender diversity and orientation and creed and race are important, but also diversity in terms of education. And we can have a debate whether there's too many designers with less than university degrees or not, but that is actually a very good source of people that we can work with. Actually, I have been involved over the last several years with teams where many of the people that are some of the smartest designers actually have a finance degree or a print background, but they don't have a formal user experience or interaction design degree. So we have to create those opportunities across the board for everybody. In addition to that, I think we need to make a lot of emphasis on empowering our teams. When I talked to Andreas Hauser, who's the head of design and the App House Innovation Centers for SAP, he related to me the story about the fact that when the first App House Design Innovation Center was created, he told the team, this is the space, I give you the money, you go look for how you want to furnish and create that space for you. The team actually went up and did a very interesting approach. They took IKEA furniture, they went to used furniture stores, and they also bought some higher level, more expensive pieces, but it was a community effort. The entire team was involved in creating that space. That is a very interesting story of empowerment. Your team or your organization may not be in the same situation, but there will be projects where you can take ownership and you can work on developing, and pursuing that passion. In another interview that I did with Alberta Soranzo, who's the head of design thinking and system thinking for the Lloyd Banking Group, we actually shared a very similar philosophy. We as designers talk a lot about empathy, but we talk about empathy with the people that we're designing for. But we forget about empathy with our own designers or our own design community or the people that we actually have to work and partner with. And it is super critical that we apply that same level of empathy, just like Nico Jauregui shared in his presentation yesterday about how he is managing that human relationship aspect with his team and with his clients. So, to wrap up the design influence part, I think it's very important that we make a lot of emphasis on partnerships, on engagement and empowerment, and we leverage empathy. Okay, so now let's shift focus a little bit in terms of a strategy. Another aspect that it is very critical, and we as designers need to make a lot of emphasis on, is that developing a design strategy or developing a design credo is not the function of the design team to create it and then give it to the organization. It is actually our role to facilitate the dialogue between the different executives that we're working with, and together identify and define and create what that credo is. Very recently, I actually, working with a large design team, I hear the executives of product, of technology, of architecture talking about, have you tested with users? What is the value that we're giving? What is the level of adoption that we're pursuing? And all these elements are actually contained in the credo that was co-created in that organization. It wasn't the design team saying, these are our principles. It was everybody involved in that creation, and that is super critical. The other aspect for you as an individual or for your managers and your leaders as they are setting the direction for the design team is actually to ensure that you understand how your value and your contribution is aligning to the overall strategy of the organization. And also for you as a design leader to share how that work is contributing to the work of your company. I used to say when I was let's say in the first half of my career, I used to say that our role as designers was to increase the design IQ of the organization. And in the second part of my career, I actually have shifted that perspective. We may be doing stealth coaching, as Katia mentioned, and we are teaching and educating our counterparts, but we're doing it from a different perspective. We actually have the responsibility to increase our knowledge of business and technology so we can actually have a more detailed conversation and engaged conversation with the people that we're working with and that we're interacting with. And we have to wake up. A lot of designers think the design is at the center of the world, that if it is not perfect design, it is not perfect process, it is not perfect, pixel perfect, then we're not achieving our goals as designers. However, if we promote the perfect process or promote the pixel perfect, location perfect of the UI widgets in the application that we're working with, we're actually losing perspective. We're working in such a zoom-in focus manner that we're forgetting that when we're doing it really for the customers or the people that use our applications. And when our conversation with our peers and our partners in the organization is about the customer and the customer experience, all of a sudden the dynamic of the conversation changes. We're no longer talking just about what design does, but what does design do for the people that we're designing for. This chart is actually from Peter Merholtz and Kristen Skinner's book, Org Design for Design Orgs. Is an excellent book that provides a lot of answers to organization needs and gaps for designers in different levels of building or evolving an in-house team. It is very interesting when Peter and Kristen talk about these. They mention the fact that we have to strike a balance on tackling all of these areas of the organization. So if you're a new leader on an existing design team, you have to have an understanding of where your team is working on. If everybody's working at the bottom level, surface and structure, then there's a gap in terms of who's defining the vision, who's defining the strategy. Very similar to what the speaker last night, I'm sorry, user experience strategy was talking about, are we the order takers, are we the wireframe monkeys, or are we helping and contributing on defining the strategy that the organization has to look for? There was a situation where I was leading a design team in an organization, and we were pretty much concentrated on surface and structure. After talking to the CIO, we realized that if we wanted to scale, we had to move or make a shift towards vision and strategy. We did it kind of almost when you pull a Band-Aid of your skin, and we basically make the shift from surface and structure all the way to vision and strategy. That was good and bad, because it basically created a vacuum effect in the rest of the organization where we were actually working very effectively, and they needed to now fill the gap that we left. So a few teams surfaced, which was actually a good and the bad. The friction that we created actually created more opportunities for other designers to come into the organization and now work embedded into those business units. If I were to do it again, I would definitely have a more softer path to make that shift and actually work closer with the business leaders of those business units to ensure that we have a clear path of transition and responsibility sharing, and even help them build the design teams, not just leave them alone and, okay, I was working with you today and I'm not going to be working with you tomorrow, but you will reap the benefits of what we do from a design program, design systems, and design perspective. Some of the speakers from the community and also from yesterday talked about the need to have a clear path of professional development. And when you think about it, if you are a designer in an organization and there's no clear path for you of, okay, what is the next role? And Dave actually talked about it in design operations on the people lens. We have to have a clear understanding of what are our options and what is it I need to do to go to the next level. Just as I mentioned in terms of developing your leadership. But the other aspect is that a lot of people think that in technology or in our industry, we have to go to management straight up just to be able to develop ourselves and our career path. I actually have a very good story of a friend of mine who used to report for me a couple of jobs ago. But her interest was actually nothing to do with management. She was an introvert. She was very quiet. She said that she preferred to text rather than call somebody on the phone. And actually, we worked together on identifying what were her passions, what motivated her, and we created actually a career path that, for her, involved interacting a lot with people. She was responsible for the user experience training for the organization. She was responsible for the UI kit for designers, so she had to talk to designers all the time. She had to travel a substantial amount of time because that was basically our global organization, and we needed somebody to lead that chart. But she didn't have to deal with the people management perspective, but she was creating global impact at a company-wide perspective. So there may be different ways in which you can find your passion and you can find your path, but if you don't talk to your peers, if you don't talk to your boss, they're not going to never find out, okay, you know, I wanted to do that, but I didn't raise my hand, or I was expecting to get to the next level, but I never talked to you about what my next level was going to be, or what the needs and expectations for that next level were going to be. And last but not least, I think it's very important for you as a leader to understand how people need to be recognized or appreciate the value of recognition. Traditionally, I was more of a pat in the back, a thank you, an email was somewhat enough, and obviously they're rewarding in terms of money and promotion. But when I became a manager and then a leader of leaders, I realized that not everybody reacts to just those two definitions of reward and recognition. Many people need a lot more time, need a lot more one-on-one, need a lot more attention, and for them, that is a level of accepting recognition. Thinking about this event, for example, if you have people from your team coming to do some of the community talks, just the fact that you came as their boss to attend and listen to them share their stories with the community, that goes a huge way into recognizing that effort and that value to the people in your team. The other thing is around autonomy, and similar to the work that I shared with you about the lady that worked for me, and she did the design training program. I had another person in my team who was very passionate about personas, but she never encountered an opportunity within the projects that she was working with to actually do the research and talk to people and basically do non-project work research so she could create some personas. So basically we worked together to define what that research plan was going to look like, and basically we created its own path, its own project that was independent of the deadlines or the deliverables that are needed to create that persona research and create those personas for the organization. So it was very interesting to see how a passion that wasn't supported by the project work actually became a project on itself. And last but not least, I think that visibility is another way in which we should recognize and reward and provide value to the people that we report to us. We have to make sure that they have the opportunity to participate, for example, in executive level meetings, and they presented and delivered the work. Actually, Chris Abor from Envision, he's now working in the design transformation practice of Envision, but when he was leading NASDAQ design team, he had a philosophy. Everybody in the design team should be able to deliver the design presentation deck. It's not just for me as the head of the team or for the managers and directors that he had. Everybody from him all the way down to the most junior level people in his organization. And it was an effort to increase the visibility and increase also the message of the design team to the organization. Okay, so wrapping up design strategy. Basically, as I mentioned, we have to ensure that we provide the opportunity for the organization to define what design is and what design means for your company, and make sure that we cover all the areas that, in terms of professional development and the focus on customer experience, so we can drive that value for our company. As designers, we need to slow down and stop. I was talking actually to Nico and other speakers earlier today about the fact that we don't have time to do everything we need to. But we need to basically stop down, slow down so we can actually speed up. And one of those things that we need to do is actually stop and listen. When I first got a role as a director of the Global User Experience Practice in an organization, my first order of business was actually what I called a listening tour. Go meet with all the heads of business units of the organization and primarily the group of direct reports to understand what made them lose sleep at night, what was their main worries. And some of those worries didn't have absolutely anything to do with design. But for example, if an organization was struggling to find kind of that mission, we facilitated a workshop where they could create the mission for their group. And then immediately started to change their perception and build their perception that we were not just the wireframe monkeys, but we were actually able to contribute to their own strategy, even if the work that we were doing for them was not specific around design. But without telling them, in a stealth mode, just like Katia mentioned earlier yesterday, we were showing them, instead of telling them, how design can contribute to their work and how some of our processes and methodologies can be applied to non-design problems. And we have to ask a lot of questions. One of the speakers mentioned is not ask questions for the sake of asking questions, but asking questions to determine how is this contributing to the strategy? How are we going to measure success and basically determine that path from there? We also have to identify some key metrics. And last year, I did a research where I talked to all the designers in a single organization. And to my surprise, one of the reactions was designers didn't know how to ask questions about metrics. They didn't know how or when to actually be strong enough to ask those questions. So similar to what Tom Kelly was talking about this morning, have that confidence into just raising the hand and asking the question, how are we measuring success? What are the KPIs that are most important to our project? What are the OKRs? And even if you don't have those questions or that kind of data is not readily available for you, you have the opportunity to determine what data do we have? Do we have any data? And the answer to that question actually was also very surprising. Some of these designers would tell and share with us the fact that they were either drowning on data and they didn't know what to do with it, and other designers would say, we don't have any data, we don't know where to start. So from that perspective, I actually have followed Julie's show from Facebook, and she was sharing a lot of information about how she thinks and how she promotes the pursuit of metrics. And one of the things that she mentions is we should be able to measure or concentrate on one or two things that we can impact. If we try to boil the ocean, we're going to lose track and sight of what we're going to do. So one of my favorite examples is engagement. So if you're a payroll company, as I was involved with payroll products for a long time, you want the people that you're serving with your payroll app to go in, concentrate or confirm that they got the deposit or that they got the reimbursement that they were looking for, and they go out. How long does that interaction should take? Probably less than 30 seconds. On the other hand, if you're in a consumer brand or in a news organization, you actually want them to stay as long as possible in your app, probably share the articles, tweet about them, put them in Facebook or in the social media platform of your choice. And then the measure in terms of being very short and quick is probably going to be 30 minutes or more where you can decide whether that is the right metric that could determine your success. I have a couple of examples that I want to share about metrics that are concentrating on the financial impact. The first one is about a project where there was a partnership between the organization that I was working with, a very large financial institution. The large bank that we were working with said, we're going to cancel the project, we're going to cancel the partnership, and that meant our organization was going to be out of $35 million. So in my conversation with the global CIO, basically he asked me, can you help? I said, sure, we can figure something out. So I got a designer and a researcher. The designer actually built the replica of the system because we couldn't use the banking and our app together because they were in production. We didn't have a testing environment. So in a couple of weeks, she built the 60 or so pages of this combined prototype, including all the good and bad things that the prototype had. And then we brought both product managers, the product manager from the bank and the product manager from our company, to the lab to observe the users. What they realized is that it was not them, it was not us, it was both of us together that needed to communicate better and talk about addressing problems that were on one side of the app and the other side of the app, because they were impacting the integrated user experience. So when the CIO would talk to either his direct reports or would talk to CIOs of other organizations, and they would ask him, what is the value that design brings to your organization? He just put $35 million and say, this is my data point. I don't need to talk about the value or how I'm going to find out the value of design. And that is a very important testament to ensure that we can actually get not only the buy-in, but also the perspective from other peers and other people that we're working with for them to understand what value we deliver to the organization. This was another consulting engagement that I was working with a company that was doing primarily insurance claims. And what the team did actually for this particular organization was creating a highlight reel that was 5 minutes of a 20-minute conversation between the person who just had a loss and the customer service agent. And even though it was a fourth of the length, the pain of the executives of that insurance company were very visible when we shared the audio of that call with them. And it was 5 minutes of cumbersome interactions of basically similar to, I think, the example that Tom shared with us this morning about, Dave. Do you create the luggage handling experience the same way as the passenger onboarding experience? It was as painful as if that was the case. At the end of the day, basically, we built the business case to redesign that claims process, because even if we couldn't cut the call to 5 minutes, but if we cut it from 20 to 10, and we address a lot of the friction points that experience had, we would save that organization over $2.9 million. And with that, our own engagement from a consulting and implementation perspective wouldn't be that expensive, so the return on investment was absolutely readily available for them to leverage. And it would pay basically for itself. Switching gears a little bit, I think that as designers, design practitioners and leaders, need to also make a lot of emphasis and focus. It's not just about the monetary value of our contributions and our impact in the organizations, but we also have to make emphasis on the consequences of our work. If you take a look at some of the social media platforms, you can say engagement at all costs so we can get as much advertising dollars as we can derive from them. But at what level of impact? Or if you look at Volkswagen and the emissions work, we as designers, if we facilitate that kind of illegal situation, we could actually go to jail. So we have to be fully aware of the consequences that our work has in terms of impact to the people and to the community or to the loss of the environment in which we move. Mike Monteiro has a very good paper on this, and he basically says that the jerk that told you that good design sells by itself, actually I just screwed up. The person that told you that design sells by itself is a jerk. Anyway, so the fact that you think that if you produce good work, that's going to just magically be promoted and served and be sold in the organization or to your client, that is a big mistake. Actually, my team was involved in a redesign of a consolidation of 12 products into one product suite. And I was in the executive committee of that particular product organization. And in a conference call, the head of product for that team said, since launch, we have been able to increase our sales of this product suite by 300% in comparison to last year when it was individual products. If I am not in that meeting, I would have never been able to find out, and then from that point forward, recruit that product manager and the CIO to promote the success of our effort. It was not only us. There were a lot of people involved, technology, product, and design. But together, we created actually a very dramatic impact in terms of the outcomes that we were looking for. Not only for our customers in terms of delivering an integrated user experience, but in terms of the organization for deriving that value that they were looking for. And last but not least, I think that it is super important, as I mentioned, that we create a sense of ethical behavior, not only in our designers, but in the people that we interact with. Because without some level of value, that it is positive and it takes care of the impact that we're going to have in the organization, we could be basically having a counterproductive perspective on the value that we have for our practice as designers and also for the organizations that we're involved in. So, to wrap up, let me just go here better. To wrap up, if we want to create that embrace from business towards the work we do, we have to tackle it in multiple manners. As individual contributors or design leaders, we have to make sure that we create the right level of influence, the right level of strategy, and the right level of value. Thank you very much.
Can you do in English?
Yeah.
So when you talk about value and promote yourself, when we're designing working like with sprint, like when in agile, and we have like a long project like for over a year, and you have little sprints to deliver something, how can I show the value of its delivery, considering we are focused on just a little team working like a squad?
That's a great question, and actually Jeff Goethals, the author of Lean UX, has some pretty good stories about that. The problem that we face is that we focus on delivery, so output rather than outcomes. So when we have the opportunity to work in an agile team, we have to figure out ways to determine how are we going to measure the outcome. You know, what is the outcome? It's not about delivering a mobile app. It's about how, if we enable the attendees of this event, for example, to manage the schedule they have set up if it was multiple tracks. Well, that sounds like a very superficial example, but it gives you some clarity. It's not about the mobile app. It's about helping the individual attending the event to figure out what talks they are going to attend. And when you talk about outcomes instead of output, then you shift the conversation. It's not about did you meet the deadline. It's about what happened when you met the deadline. Was the product adopted? Were the users satisfied? What level of engagement did you create? And at that point, it doesn't matter if the project is 2 years or 2 months or 2 weeks. Then you can determine how are we going to measure success. And that is basically the approach that I suggest. You try to promote, ask questions, how are we going to measure success? How can we create that level of awareness that it is not just about meeting the deadline, but it is about what kind of impact are we looking forward to creating when we reach that delivery date. Thank you.
Aqui.
Oi.
Falou?
Yep.
Em português.
Oh, okay, hold on.
Você falou, uma das coisas que mais me chamaram a atenção nessa palestra foi o seu ponto em relação à diversidade e inclusão. E a minha pergunta é mais sobre como você enxerga esse cenário atual nas empresas de tecnologia, nessa indústria, e como você acha que as empresas deveriam impulsionar isso impulsionar essa pauta, né, em relação a essa integração de mais pessoas diversas, até, como você falou, até mesmo em pensamentos, não só em questões de raças ou gênero.
That is a great question. I think, as I mentioned, the challenge that organizations have is that they concentrate, for example, in the hiring practice. We use the application tracking systems. If you don't meet one of the requirements from the tracking system, you immediately get rejected, for example. So these systems are actually built with some bias in place that are not inclusive and non-diverse. So that's one area of opportunity. Another opportunity, I mentioned it briefly. If you had, let's say, a background in communication, and you all of a sudden decided to pursue and change careers to design, you study, you read, you certified yourself in one of those intensive courses, but organizations are actually not creating opportunities for that level of a skill, new skilled worker into the design field. I was actually talking to a recruiter from Facebook in London, and she basically gave me a very high-level statistic. There's 200,000 designers in the world. 170,000 are in the US. If you're in a market in a big city, then that gives 25,000 divided, I don't know how many hundred cities there are, but if you're in a big market like London, basically there's not enough designers to go around and cover all the needs. So they're now going to South America, to Argentina, to Brazil, to Colombia, and to Europe in non-traditional places to find that talent. That is actually an effort that it is driven by business, but they realize that that diversity of the workforce is actually going to help them in terms of the work that they're going to do. So there's different levels in terms of hiring practice, in diversity of educational background, and also giving the opportunity for like senior designers and lead designers to train some of the junior people in the team. That's also part of the diversity and inclusion that I was referring to.
Oi, aqui.
Alô?
Left, here.
Okay.
Ok. Eu vou falar em português.
Okay.
Você falou que é importante os designers entenderem sobre os KPIs da empresa, né? E concordo plenamente. Esses KPIs normalmente medem o sucesso da empresa, certo? E nós, como designers centrados no sucesso do cliente, a gente deveria olhar e criar KPIs que realmente garantem o sucesso do cliente. Não como Customer Success, atendimento lá, mas the success of the customer, certo? Eu queria saber que tipo de indicadores você sugere que a gente utilize para medir se o nosso design está realmente impactando e melhorando a vida dos clientes, de fato. Existem alguns indicadores de atendimento, por exemplo, NPS, Satisfaction, esse tipo de coisa, que medem os prejudices, né? O quanto ele indicaria para um amigo e coisa assim, mas isso ainda não é o sucesso do cliente, de fato. Eu queria saber se você tem alguma sugestão de como medir, não o design, mas o sucesso dos clientes para quem a gente faz design.
That is a tough question. I think you have to start small. If you try to measure the macro level impact of the product or the consulting work that you deliver for the client, then it's going to be very, very difficult to boil the ocean. Just like Mark mentioned yesterday, zoom out, but zoom in, and maybe focus on one area that you can measure. I am not a fan of NPS, Net Promoter Score, but for example, was there impact there? So moving out of that one, were there additional referrals of the client or the product adoption? Did it grow? Was there good feedback in the press? I mean, there be qualitative and quantitative ways to measure that impact, but focus on just a couple of areas that you can actually either collect or observe, because otherwise you're going to say, well, did we impact the life of the people that we were working with? Actually, Tom Kelly had a couple of very good examples of very complex problems with a measurable impact, both from a person life perspective as well as a business impact perspective.
Aqui.
Aló, acá. Hey. Hola.
Vou perguntar
atrás.
em português.
¿Quién es primero?
Eu.
¿En español?
Em português.
Ah,
Em português.
Portugués.
Você falou para a gente tentar medir outcome ao invés de output. E quando se trabalha num ambiente ágil e que tem que tentar reduzir desperdício e retrabalho, é muito mais cobrado da gente medir produtividade, previsibilidade e qualidade. Você acha que a gente consegue medir isso ou é interessante negociar para não fazer esse tipo de medição e abordar de outra forma?
That is a great question. I think Tom mentioned, what are the hypotheses that you're trying to prove? Or what kind of small experiments can you define so you can determine if you have had impact, if the team's work has had impact? When I mentioned Jeff Gossel's example, basically Agile doesn't have a brain. Agile is focused on output, but when we put the outcomes in place, we can determine, for example, are people communicating more effectively with the use of this combined tool set? Or are they going outside of that technology that we're delivering to them and going to not secured, not approved apps to achieve the goal of communicating effectively within the team or within the client and team collaboration environment? So there's ways in which you can actually determine little experiments or little questions or formulate hypotheses that will allow you and enable you and your team to pursue and be able to measure the outcome impact, not the output, because the output is clear. Okay, you delivered the app, you delivered the tools, you provided some integration, you created some back-end alleviation of impact on friction, but was that actually creating a real impact in the organization?
acá, detrás tuyo. Hola. Sí, bueno, muchas gracias por tu presentación. Desde tu experiencia trabajando con diseñadores, sobre todo con diseñadores de nivel junior, ¿qué recomendarías tú a esos diseñadores para poder obtener un lugar en la mesa de conversación con gente de negocio? ¿Más formación o convertirse en líderes de opinión? ¿O qué recomendarías tú desde tu experiencia?
Para asegurarnos, la conversación del diseñador junior para llegar a la mesa de trabajo, a la mesa de discusión, de negociación, ¿cierto?
Claro.
Ok. Obviamente, mientras menos experiencia tenga uno, es un poquito más difícil llegar a la mesa de trabajo. Pero todos los ejemplos que tú acabas de dar, escribamos, hagamos un proyecto personal, busquemos una organización sin ánimo de lucro que nos pueda dar la oportunidad para aumentar nuestra experiencia y exposición a retos que son diferentes con los que trabajamos. Cuando estamos dentro de la organización como diseñadores en un equipo interno, debemos hacer énfasis en entender cómo nuestro trabajo está alineado con los objetivos del producto o del equipo con el que estamos trabajando y de la misma manera cómo nuestro trabajo impacta la estrategia de la organización. Si nosotros estamos tan concentrados en los artefactos que estamos produciendo, entonces no nos vamos a poder dar cuenta de cuál es nuestro impacto. En el momento en el que comenzamos a hablar no solamente del proceso de diseño, de las herramientas que utilizamos, pero hablamos del impacto que estamos creando, en ese momento estamos cambiando el nivel de la conversación. Y ahí es cuando se nos va a presentar la primera oportunidad de llegar a la mesa de trabajo con otros líderes y con otros ejecutivos para poder lograr ese impacto. Y creo que con eso se me acabó el tiempo. Muchas gracias. Obrigado.